Muslim Canadian woman. When I moved to Canada in the 90s, a young girl trying to make this nation my home, some kids in school would yell as they pushed me, "Go home, you Muslim." But I was home. I'm among thousands of Muslims who have been victimized because of hate and fear. I'm a proud Canadian, a Canadian among hundreds and thousands of others who will not tolerate hate based on religion or skin color. I rise today with my fellow Canadians to reject and condemn Islamophobia. On this historic day, when petition E411 is tabled, I'm honored to bring forward motion 103, calling on our government to condemn Islamophobia and work towards eliminating all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. I look forward to the support of all members of this House. Mr. Speaker, we are all Canadian.
She is right. Everyone in Canada is a Canadian, but that is the only thing she is right about. It sucks that she was bullied as a kid, but you don't take personal experiences into account when you're in politics. She talks about hate and race as the reason for most people to fear Islam. She is so out of touch with reality when she says all Islamophobia is hate speech, which we all know hate speech doesn't exist because there is no clear definition to explain it. Ira Khalid's speech was vague. How do you define hate? How do you define Islamophobia? As we can see, the person bringing forward motion 103 doesn't know what she's talking about. So what is this motion 103? How bad can it be? Well, it turns out it is an attack on our freedom of speech. Canada is getting closer to making a vague law that would make Islamophobia a hate crime. The problem is, with this law in place, you can go to jail without it being defined as an offense. This is serious because it gets rid of freedom of speech, because this motion doesn't take into account the differences between actual racism towards Muslims and a critic of Islam. Now, I get they have good intentions, but silencing good people for the result of a few bad ones is wrong. This bill is an attack on people's freedoms to express oneself. They have completely ignored the valid reasons to ignore Islam. They want to get rid of racism and hate in society, but are so blinded by one simple truth. Hate and racism is impossible to get rid of because it is a flaw we have as humans. We are not robots. They have to understand that all people, even haters and racists, still need a platform to speak their mind. It is very simple. Let people speak their mind and let society decide if they're right. Let me give an example. A racist person that doesn't know they're racist. The person is not allowed to speak their mind because it would be deemed hate speech and they would be thrown in jail. If the racist person was allowed to speak, the person would have a chance to figure out that society finds the speech racist and the racist person can have a chance to fix their ideas. Now that wouldn't happen if their speech was ignored. It would only increase their racism and can breed hate. That is why this bill is a problem. It wants to get rid of racism, but instead amplifies hatred in people by ignoring them. We have seen what happens when a parent ignores a child. It is the same result. Islamophobia is such a vague term to use. You can't just group up academics and racists together and call both motives the same. If we look back in history, there was a perfect example of this happening in Germany to censor the Jewish people. In Nazi Germany, the Jewish people slowly got prosecuted by the Nazis in society. During the first 6 years of Hitler's dictatorship, from 1933 to the outbreak of war in 1939, the Jewish people felt the effects of more than 400 decrees and regulations that restricted all ways of life from the Jewish people. The first wave of legislation from 1933 to 1934 focused on limiting the participation of Jews in German public life. The government made laws to exclude Jews from organizations, professions, and other features of public life. In April of 1933, German law restricted the number of Jewish students at German schools and universities. At the national level, the Nazi government imposed a 1.5% quota on the admission of non-Aryans to public schools and universities. They also fired Jewish civilian workers from the army, and early in 1934 forbade Jewish actors from performing on stage and screen. In September 1935, the Nazi leaders announced new laws which sided with Nazi ideology. These were the Nuremberg Laws. These laws excluded German Jews from Reich citizenship and prohibited them from marrying with people of German-related blood. The Jewish people were also stripped of most political rights, like the right to vote, and could not hold public office. The Nuremberg Law did not see a Jew as a person with specific religious beliefs. It instead defined a Jew as anyone who had 3 or 4 Jewish grandparents as a Jew. Regardless if the person didn't identify as a Jew, Even people that converted to Christianity were still defined as Jews. In the many years, laws were put in place that took all the rights the Jews had as people. In August 1938, German authorities announced that by January 1st, 1939, Jewish men and women bearing first names of non-Jewish origin had to add Israel and Sarah to their given names. All Jewish people were forced to carry identity cards that showed their Jewish heritage. In the autumn of 1938, all Jewish passports were stamped with the letter J. As the Nazi leaders prepared for war on the conquest of Europe, their legislation made it easier to oppress the Jews. Now be in mind, all these attacks on the Jews would have not happened if not for the laws put in place by the Nazi government to silence the Jewish people. The same goes for Motion 103. Adding a law for the excuse of stopping hate is ridiculous. You can't suppress people's opinions because if you do, the people would be powerless and silent. And that would be an example of fascism. Everyone as people need human rights. The government can't take them away because they are offended by a few people. The thing is, it took time to oppress the Jewish people. Who's to say Motion 103 is just one of many laws to take away freedom of speech from the people, regardless of whether it is intentional or not? Now that we talked about Motion 103 and its flaws, there was a funny video of a confused woman claiming Islam is the most feminist religion. Here's the video.
Let's stick with migration first. That's a question about migration. And
okay.
I mean, earlier this month or last month, you reportedly said Australia should follow Donald Trump's path.
Well, I've actually said it in the past, and what I've said is I would rather look after our own backyard first, which we're not. We're actually taking from the poor. So that's, you know, somehow when we've got 1/3 of our pensioners, our wage pensioners living on or below the poverty line, something needs to be done. And if that means we need to put a hold or a ban on that for 2 years to fill in that gap to make sure that those people in our own backyard get what is needed. So I've got isatics out there everywhere. I've got kids at 11 and 12. I can't get them into rehab centres because the government doesn't want to spend the money on them. You know, we need to look after our own backyard first.
Jackie, can I just interrupt? Did you say to the advocate in Tasmania that we should follow Donald Trump's example by deporting all Muslims who support Sharia law?
Yep, that's correct. Anybody that supports Sharia law in this country should be deported.
So do you know what Sharia law is?
Yes, but it doesn't
What,
have
do you
equal
know what
rights.
it is?
Are
Me
you
praying
five Sharia law?
Of course,
Do
me
you?
praying 5 times a day is Sharia.
Okay.
Right? Like basic...
What about the equal rights for women? What about...
That is completely separate from
Oh, so
Islam.
now you can be a Sharia law supporter and be half pregnant at the same time.
What
Come
are you talking
on.
about?
Let's
You were
just-
talking
let's just
about
try and
stuff
have
you
one
don't know anything about. Like, okay, I'm not going to attack you personally.
What
but
law?
my frustration is that people talk about Islam without knowing anything about it. And they're willing to completely negate any of my rights as a human being, as a woman, as a person with agency, simply because they have an idea about what my faith is about. Excuse me, Islam to me is the most feminist religion.
Islam is not the most feminist religion. You gotta be kidding. I find it funny that she claims people don't know enough about Islam to talk about it. Historians and people that study Islam for their whole career apparently know nothing. I love that she has the arrogance to say that she has more knowledge of Islam for a person as young and brainwashed as herself. Now that we're on the topic of Islam, let's see how much Sharia law is for women's rights. Now we know under Western laws, women are equal to men, but this is a lot different under Sharia law. Women under Sharia law are not equal to men. They are instead considered to be inferior to men. In the Quran 4:34, Husbands are allowed to beat their wives if they fear their wife will soon break their rules. This implies that she can be beaten without even breaking the rules in the first place, and the beating will still be justified. Men are the managers of the affairs of women, for that God has preferred in bounty one of them over another, and for that they have expended of their property. Righteous women are therefore obedient, guarding the secret for God's guarding, and those you fear may be rebellious, admonish, banish them to their couches, and beat them. If they obey you, look not for any way against them. God is all high, all great. What is really interesting is, this woman beating law is also found in Muhammad's farewell address, or last sermon, the oldest and most reliable biography of Muhammad we have so far. According to the Quran 2:282, the testimony of women is only worth half of a man's, and bring to witness 2 witnesses from among your men, and if there are not 2 men available, then a man and 2 women from those whom you accept as witnesses, so that if one of the women errs, then the other can remind her. Yet again, another law that makes women have little to no rights. According to the Quran 4:11 and 4:176, women can only inherit half as much as her male brother. In a religiously mixed marriage, when the wife happens to be non-Muslim, the wife legally loses all the husband's inheritance if she doesn't convert to the one and only religion, Islam. According to the Quran 65:4, having sexual relations with underage females is allowed. As for those of your women who have no hope of further menstruation, if you're in doubt, their waiting period is 3 months, and also for those who have not yet menstruated. This verse pretty much means that a Muslim man has to wait 3 months before divorcing prepubescent girls for the reason of making sure that the child isn't pregnant. Under Sharia law, a husband can divorce his wife at any time by stating, "You are divorced," 3 times in the presence of 2 mentally sane males. The husband does not have to justify his reason for the divorce and will take custody of any children. The crazy thing is, if the husband regrets his decision and wants his wife back for the 3rd time, she must marry a second man, and the second husband would have to divorce her for her to go back to her ex-husband. This doesn't make any sense, and there is no thought of what the woman wants. She is powerless and has to follow these messed up rules. Under Sharia law, female rulers are not looked upon too highly. This law originates from the hadith, a narrative, which is an account of the habits of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. This is where Muhammad, upon hearing the news that the people of Persia has made the daughter of Khusru their queen, Muhammad states, "Never will succeed such a nation that makes a woman their ruler." And just because Muhammad made this statement means it must be true. Under Sharia law, a husband has full control over his wife and can forbid his wife from leaving the home. In this hadith, Muhammad tells a woman her prayers mean nothing if she does not have her husband's permission. This law is also confirmed by the Reliance of the Traveler, a 14th century manual. The manual states that a woman may not leave the city without her husband or a member of her unmarriageable kin accompany her, unless the journey is mandatory. Like the Hajj, it is awful for her to travel otherwise, and unlawful for her husband to allow her. Under Sharia law, polygamy is allowed. In the Quran 4:3, it allows Muslim men to marry more than one wife, which is still allowed to this day. Women are considered to lack intelligence and faith under Sharia law. Now here is a hadith narrative that involves Muhammad saying the majority of hell is made out of women and that women are deficient in intelligence and religion. Once Allah's messenger Muhammad went out to the Musalla, place of prayer, to offer the prayer. Then he passed by a woman and said, "O woman, give alms, as I have seen that the majority of dwellers of hellfire were you, women." They asked, "Why is it so, O Allah's messenger? You curse frequently and you're ungrateful to your husbands. I have not seen anyone more deficient in intelligence and religion than you. Cautious, sensible man could be led astray by some of you." The woman asked, "O Allah's messenger, what is deficient in our intelligence and religion?" He said, "Is not the evidence of 2 women equal to the witness of 1 man?" They replied in affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency in her intelligence. Isn't it true that a woman can neither pray nor fast during her menses?" The woman replied in affirmative. He said, "This is the deficiency in her religion." Now what makes this even crazier is the fact most fundamentalist Muslims all over the world believe in accepting this narrative. Stories such as this have been the source of oppression for Muslim women over generations. Under Sharia law, raping female prisoners is acceptable. Sharia law allows warriors to capture women of infidels. and use them for their sexual pleasure. It also allows having female slaves that don't count as wives. In the story of Muhammad, he engaged in sexual relations with a woman. Now this was the same day or a few days after killing her father and husband. Now here's a section of the story. Passing the night girl with his sword, guarding the apostle Muhammad, and going around the tent until the morning, the apostle saw him there and asked him what he meant by his action. He replied, "I was afraid for you with this woman, for you have killed her father, her husband, and her people. Until recently she was in unbelief, so I was afraid on your account." This excerpt is pretty clear that the guard wanted to guard Muhammad because he thought the woman held a deep hatred for Muhammad because he slaughtered her people as well as her husband and father. Now, if this early source on Islam can be trusted as fact, that would mean Muhammad raped the woman and let his fathers have their way with the captured women. Now, this story can be argued whether it happened in history or not, but regardless, it is still a core identity of what Islam is today and can't be ignored. Now, there is a solution to this problem and a way to reform. When you look at the inequality of women, it is not coming from Muslims as people, it is coming from the religious text itself. That would mean people would have to critique the flaws of Islam in order to fix the problem. Now that sounds simple, and it is. But like Bill M103 in Canada, it would make this task a lot harder to do. Making laws to prevent freedom of speech would make society turn to Nazi Germany and Sharia law for women, because the Nazis took rights from the Jews, as well as Sharia law took away rights from Muslim women to the point they were slaves in their own culture. Freedom of speech is so important to society. It makes it so the smallest of voices have a voice, and it must not be touched whatsoever. The government has no say in what you can say. That is the reason society has gotten this far, because we never know when there will be a time when we'll need our freedom of speech to defend ourselves, which that time seems to be now. Ira Khalid and Justin Trudeau's government need to realize this. Freedom of speech makes us different from poorly developed countries that make their people suffer. The people of the world just want all voices to be heard, not the selected few the government chooses to listen to. It is very simple. Listen to everyone and put no laws to take away freedom of speech, and everyone will be happy. If freedom of speech is taken away, then dumb and silent we may be led, like sheep to the slaughter. George Washington. History tends to repeat itself for those who don't want to listen. That is why history is so important. We can see the flaws in the past, and use it as an example to learn from it. It seems the government of Canada knows little to nothing about history. They rather just dictate how people should think. Thanks for watching. My sources are in the description below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.